Hello, everyone. I'm Chris O'Brien, an American tech journalist based here in Europe, and I'm delighted to be here to moderate this panel on digital technologies. Our big theme is tech for good. We're going to explore that topic by zooming into three categories that have the potential to transform society and the economy: GovTech, Fintech, and data. We'll discuss the important innovations and trends in these sectors to understand their potential to reshape and improve the world. For this conversation, we're going to draw on the expertise of leaders in these sectors from both sides of the Atlantic. For GovTech, we've invited Amir Boulouryazad from New York City, who is based now in Brussels, where he's head of marketing at Citizen Lab, and Fred Pivetta of Dalberg Data Insights. For FinTech and InsurTech, we'll be joined by Jean-Louis Van Houwe, chairman of FinTech for Belgium, Lionel Tapiero of Experian, and Jean-Charles Velge, co-founder of Cover. To speak about data and AI, we have Stijn Christiaens of Calibra, Omid Bakhshandeh of Vernique, and Donald Johnston, a partner at Aird and Berlis. Let me thank Hub Brussels for this initiative and bringing together this panel of experts for this Insight Talk. And finally, we're pleased to have with us Stefaan Sonck Thiebaut, Director General at Innoviris, who will have the last word and explain the advantages that Brussels offers to entrepreneurs and innovators. We begin with GovTech. Being based in Brussels, there may be no better place to examine the future of government and tech. At the heart of the European Commission and NATO, Brussels is the epicenter of policymaking. Governments of all sizes are grappling with the demands to regulate new technologies, as well as harness their power to improve the lives of citizens. So let's start with Fred Pivetta. Welcome, Fred.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us, Fred. You wear many hats, and I'm wondering if you can first tell us about your role as co-founder and CEO of Dalberg Data Insights. What is the company's mission?
So Dalberg Data Insights needs to be seen as a company that is active in a broader, I would say, journey. And that journey is basically a regulatory trend that we can see here, where you see a market for data shaping up in a way where you see large organizations that get control of the data, start sharing the data. Sometimes governments start doing that. In the future, the way we see it is that individual citizens are going to be able to also control the data and probably sell the data for specific purposes in the market. So the role of Dalberg Data Insights is to basically build data ecosystems for social impact. So basically what we do is that we identify specific social questions like access to water, access to energy, or vaccination, or for instance also the COVID crisis. And then we build what we call a data ecosystems around it, which is tech tools, a data community to make sure we have the right people and organizations around the table, and also data governance, because at the end of the day, we need to build like a system, an ecosystem that is sustainable, not only regulatory, not only having a regulatory sustainability, but also an economic sustainability. And so you need to have like a data governance around all this. And today, honestly, data governance is taking, I would say, 35% of our time. The tech tools is 40%, and the rest is around building data communities, having the right people around the table. We work with the Gates Foundation, we work with governments, we have been working with the Belgian government during the COVID crisis, with the European Commission, with the World Bank, and many others, Gavi, for instance, when it comes to vaccination. We work globally, so we are based out of Brussels, the headquarters in Brussels, but we have offices across Africa, East and West Africa. The way we see it is that today we are building data ecosystems, but tomorrow we will need probably to build what we call decision ecosystem. So today we do that for social impact purposes. Tomorrow it's also going to be for social impact purposes, but with a different twist, I would say, from data to decision. And obviously we work with a lot of stakeholders, including local stakeholders that we have around the table today, like Innoviris, for instance, that has been supporting us in some of our work, for instance.
Great. Now, that's already a rich series of topics, but before we dive into those further, I want to point out that in addition to Dalberg Data Insights, you're also a member of Digital Minds, a committee of leading digital thinkers that is advising the Belgium government on a wide range of smart nation projects. So can you explain what are the goals of Digital Minds for Belgium?
Yeah, so Digital Minds I would say it's a group of around 20 people, either leading digital companies or part of the academic world, or part of the social, I would say the social sector. And the goal is really to help and support the country in terms of setting up, setting up a digital agenda for 2030. The digital agenda for 2030 is around data governance, for instance, but it's also around access to the internet. It's around making sure that we have like an inclusive society, an inclusive approach when it comes to digital. I mean, there are many, I would say 10 or 15 objectives, topics, ambitions that we have for the country. And then it's really, our role is also to jump in and to start leading some of this work, either with some public administration or with the private sector, but really try to build kind of an ecosystem around each of these ambitions for the country for 2030.
So that's amazingly ambitious goals. I'm wondering if you can just describe some of the projects specifically that are coming out of this Digital Minds group.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a few projects could be, for instance, around data governance. And in Belgium, we are very lucky because we have like leading organization when it comes to data governance. We have somebody here as well, Christiaens from Colibra, and we have also another company called It's Me. We have Dalberg Data Insights, building data ecosystem. So we have like, I would say, thought leaders when it comes to data governance. And some of the projects are around, for instance, building a digital wallet for every Belgian citizen. It is also building like some academic program around data governance. And it's also to support the private sector when it comes to building individual digital wallet, for instance, because I mean, a lot of private companies have also data on individuals, and these people might want to control the data. So we are either directly leading some of these projects, like for instance, the digital wallet, with making sure that the citizens can access administrative data, but we're also trying to indirectly support the private sector and making sure that everything is set up and is in place for new business opportunities to emerge when it comes to data governance, individual data control, for instance.
Yeah, I love the ambition of this project, and it's so forward-thinking, and there's so much potential, I think, to really have an impact on the lives of citizens with this. Now, Fred, I want you to stay with us for a moment. I want to turn to Amir. Amir, your focus has been more on transforming local governments and their relationship to citizens. So I'm wondering, can you tell us a bit more about Citizen Lab and why are you so unique in the GovTech sphere?
Sure, definitely. Happy to do so. So Citizen Lab essentially is a community engagement platform. And what we do is that we work closely with the governments to enable them to engage with their residents and gather their ideas, gather their inputs, and essentially make better decisions at the end of the day. You asked me why we're unique in this field. There are several factors that make Citizen Lab unique in the field. Number one is that we are truly global. We work with over 300 local governments across the world. Obviously, the EU is our base, and we've managed to grow successfully within the EU, helping a lot of governments, especially in Belgium and the Netherlands, engage with their residents and create impactful projects. The second topic is actually impact. So our mission is very much connected to impact. Even internally in the company, we are one of our main KPIs is essentially to maximize the amount of impact via the projects that the local governments are running in their municipalities. So that is one of the unique fields. So we don't necessarily work with a lot of organizations out there, very much focused on the local governments. And we also try to help them actually deliver on the results that they gather from our platform. And finally, I would say it's the product itself. So it's not just a typical platform where you just gather ideas, but we've managed to also utilize NPL capabilities into the tool that also help governments, not spend as much time in analyzing the data, but rather try to use the data immediately to make those decisions out of the essentially the information that they've gathered from their residents.
So let's talk about the opportunities and challenges for governments in this era. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the role that transparency and inclusion are playing in terms of motivating local governments to rethink their services. What is the real driving force with the governments that you're working with?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's twofold. I mean, on the one hand, we're talking about public servants here. They're innately conditioned to help their residents and make their lives better. And at least that's the mission there. So, if they're able to engage more residents, more of their constituents into the decision-making process, that helps them make better decisions. And in return, it essentially makes them better public servants. And that's the main driver here. On the other hand, we're talking about large budgets that cities are spending and taxpayers' money a lot of times, and essentially being able to use data and use large number of data. So not just focusing on the 10 people who show up in the town halls, and it's always those same exact 10 people, but rather trying to increase their coverage. So in that sense, they're more inclusive, they're more transparent in terms of their decision makings, and they can be also more accountable because, I mean, pretty much the whole process is out there in public.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to enough of those town hall meetings myself as a younger journalist to know who those 10 people are that you're talking about. So they bring a lot of passion, but also it can give you a distorted view of the world sometimes, I think. And in that respect, I know one of the examples of the work you're doing then involves participatory budgeting. And that leverages, of course, open data. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Just an example of the kind of impact that you're having.
Sure, definitely. I can think of a project in the city of Ghent, actually, in Belgium, where we worked with the city to implement a series of projects where, so essentially the city's budget for participation was quadrupled. And the question was, okay, how do we spend this money? What the city did is that one of their main goals was to increase inclusiveness as well. So go towards the vulnerable neighborhoods where usually these people do not have a voice in the decision-making process, and there's different obstacles for participation here. So the city of Ghent managed to create 12 different, essentially, platforms for 12 different neighborhoods to also separate the inputs that they're getting to make sure that within each neighborhood there's enough number of data points that are collected, and essentially enable the citizens to choose how they want to spend this budget that their neighborhoods have to enhance the community that's there. We've seen great results there. Also in the UK, we're working with Newham, similar story. And also in Seattle in the States, we have a large project coming up that is also gonna, it's a lot oriented, it's pretty much around green spaces and increasing the number of green spaces in the city and where those are located, how the money should be spent, and where it should be spent. So in general, what happens at the end is that you see residents giving their input on the platform. Obviously, the government gathers this data points, looks at the trends, usually also they try to have more of an inclusive representation in terms of the decisions that are submitted on the platform, and make the final decision of how they will spend this public money.
Yeah, it seems like such vital work at a time when people are so skeptical or frustrated with government to really renew that sort of relationship and create this kind of dynamic that can hopefully restore that faith that democracy and local governments can really be a positive force in their lives. There's that sort of disconnect we see increasingly, I think, between governments and citizens. I want to shift a little bit now along that line. You know, both of your projects fit neatly into our Tech for Good theme for the reasons I was just discussing. But let's step back now and talk about the broader role of government, both as a rulemaker and service provider to citizens. Now, Fred, it strikes me that with the Digital Minds project, Belgium seems to be taking an approach that reflects a broader European mindset that's in contrast to the US government's. It's something I've really noticed since I've been in Europe, where the government is more comfortable playing a central role in regulation, but also in formulating policy, roadmaps, catalyzing development of services. Can't we just expect that the free market's going to naturally shape these issues, or is it really important that the government plays such an active role?
I would say that you have also historical reasons why I would say the European Commission took some initiatives into this. Europe is probably less market-based than the US. But overall, what you can see is that regulation is meant for a few reasons. One of the reasons is that you want to basically have like a very clear ethical guideline for your entire society, economy, etc. That was really at the core of the GDPR to a certain extent, where you want to put the citizens back in control of their data. Another example of ethical reason is when the European Commission wants to basically regulate artificial intelligence. It's because it's hard to regulate artificial intelligence from a technical and technological perspective, because building AI products can be done with very basic, I would say, components and modules. So you go for the regulation on the other end of the spectrum, which is, or the value chain, which is basically the use that you can do of AI. So these are really either practical or ethical reasons why you need a good regulation. And that's one of the roles of the states in Europe historically, and that's one also of the roles of the European Commission. The other reason is basically to fill a market gap or solve for, I would say, some market failures. And a good example of that has been what we call the PSD2 regulation in Europe, which has basically forced the bank to open the back end of the IT system so that the entire fintech industry could really emerge and flourish in Europe. Obviously, there were other reasons for that, and it's not it's not a silver bullet. I mean, next to that, you also need probably some investment capacity, but really that PSD2 regulation was really solving for market failure, which was the access for data. So what I truly believe is that the EU regulation offers more, I would say, more long-term solution for technology and digital, because it means that citizens, individuals, organizations can trust the other stakeholders of the ecosystem much more, because they need to follow some rules. And the other thing is that it creates real business opportunities. And the Data Governance Act is a very good example of that. I mean, the Data Governance Act, for just as a background, is basically a regulation that's going to go into effect in a few years from now. But that basically says something, among many other things, something that you could and you should reuse administrative data. So it reopens an entire new set of business opportunities somehow. And that's, I would say, pretty important, because now what we try to do, for instance, at Dalberg Data Insights is using telecom data, health data, etc., on our own to try to help govern to solve the COVID crisis by providing better insights on the risks, or the epidemiological risks. But imagine that you can have, like, I would say, a systematic approach to that, which comes from a regulation. And by the way, China somehow is going into that direction too, obviously from a different angle. But when you think about the Shanghai Data Exchange that opened for trading on November the 25th, I mean, these guys, they are facilitating and making things happening when it comes to exchange data between organizations. And again, it creates new business opportunities. It solves problems that population, individuals, organizations might have in a very easy way, in an innovative way and in a very sustainable way, which is very important if you want to create, I would say, long-term value for everybody.
Well, thank you for that, Fred, because I think that highlights an important thing that I've noticed being over here in Europe, which is that view that government can be an enabler, not just an obstacle to these types of things. So I think that's an important theme to remember. And as well, thank you also for mentioning the financial regulations. I think that's something we'll come back to a little bit later in the fintech portion of our conversation. Amir, I want to come back to you with a similar question. You had mentioned previously that you're working with local governments here in Europe and in the United States. So I'm wondering if you see a real difference in the way those local governments are embracing these kind of tools, or is it a pretty unified, similar culture in terms of how they think about these things?
No, that's a great question. And I think when you look at the projects, at the end, the essence of the projects are not that different. However, in terms of their approach, in terms of kind of embracing community engagement as a whole, and especially online community engagement, there are different sets of motivations and obstacles at the same time. In Europe, we have a lot of cities who are mandated to engage their residents into their decision-making process by their national governments and by regulation a lot of times. And at the same time, and this is while in the US, we have cities taking up the initiative and wanting to do this, but then the concern comes in terms of having an echo chamber a little bit on these platforms. The partisanship that we see in the States a lot of times, holds governments back in terms of putting more maybe controversial topics on the table. But the initial goal and motivation of every department that is running the projects is very non-political. And at the end of the day, they're trying to enhance people's lives. It's just the dynamics within the society on each side of the Atlantic, I guess, makes quite a bit of a difference in terms of the approach and how willingness those local governments are to open up the door for community engagement on large scale.
Yeah. Well, again, as an American in Europe, it's a shame to see that dynamic in my home country, but I'm hopeful that the work you all are doing is really going to plant some seeds and really start to shift that dynamic and restore that faith in civic duty and civic participation. Amir and Fred, I want to thank you both for joining us for this section of our conversation. Please stay with us. We'll invite you back towards the end of the conversation. But for now, let's shift gears a bit and explore the notion of fintech for good. While there is financial innovation happening around the world, it has emerged as a particular area of strength in Europe, where we count at least 30 fintech unicorns. These startups have been transforming all aspects of the financial sector while motivating incumbents to embrace innovation. To give us an overview of this financial revolution, we're joined by Jean-Louis Van Houwe. Welcome, Jean-Louis.
Hello, happy to be there.
Now, Jean-Louis is a real entrepreneur and the chairman of Fintech for Belgium. Jean-Louis, can you tell us more about the organization as well as your own background?
Yes, sure. So the organization Fintech Belgium has been created 6 years ago. This is really a non-profit organization from grassroots. In the board of directors, you have only entrepreneurs, and we are all working free of charge. And we have an organization to organize the promotion of our sector, the information of the people in the ecosystem, and also to organize very important and famous networking events that all the ecosystem in Belgium knows. And recently we have had the Digital Finance Summit, which was a very great success. With respect to my background, I founded Moniz, which is an e-payment solution for dedicated payments, pretty much at the crossroads of HR tech, marketing tech, and fintech. And let me speak maybe back about the Fintech Association, if you want. So in our association, we have more than 130 members. And we are promoting the various technologies, the innovation that we can bring to the market, but also we are structured in various verticals. Obviously, for the last 10 years, the maturity of specific sectors has evolved, and therefore it required a dedicated attention from us. So obviously we cover the fintech, you know, the payments, e-commerce, loan, wealth management with the robot advisors and so forth, the KYCs, the banking and neobanks. But we also, and for the last 5 years, InsurTech has been booming. Like we will have JC Velge from Cover that will explain us a little bit what's happening in the InsurTech sector. So InsurTech is really, you know, following up pretty much what's happening in the fintech. The fintech, you know, the very big boost of digitalization and so forth happened in the last 10 to 15 years. And we can say that now InsurTech is going through the same type of revolutions. Revolution of the fintechs, obviously, or when we speak about tech, is revelation about the UX, user interface, the business model, but also the manner that innovative technologies like blockchain of artificial intelligence can truly transform the way services are provided to clients, whether B2B or B2C. We just mentioned the regulation. So regulation tech is very important, obviously, and especially in our sector, because it is regulated for one very good reason, is to protect the clients, the consumers, and the companies. You know, with AML, KYC, and all the MiFID and Basel type of technologies that can bring, let's say, additional efficiency for traditional players, because in order to be you know, conform with the regulation, it could take a lot of energy, and thanks to the regulation tech people, actually you are very much efficient. We have also the accounting tech, which is you know, more and more in the B2B space. You know, the people know their accountants and the way they've been working. You know, everything needs to be real time. And as you have the balance sheet and the P&L of your clients, you can proactively propose financial services. So accounting tech is also very much booming. So the last vertical that we added this year actually is the blockchain. And actually, that's the matter of the calendar. We have had a very big press release with the ministers today, just to announce the addition of the BACS, which is a blockchain association for exchange platform and custodian. Our analysis is that the blockchain technology is surely very mature, and the train has not left yet the station.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole panel for an hour just on blockchain. So I agree with you there. It's a whole rich area to explore. For now, I want to stay just with fintech specifically. It's really struck me as a tech journalist for more than 2 decades and now working in Europe. There's such a frenzy of activity drawing entrepreneurs and venture capital into the sector. What are the big trends that you see in fintech? You've mentioned a few of them just now, I think, but what do you see really driving the companies that you work with in the association?
So what is driving is, the first force is digitization. The more the various, and I don't speak about digitization about the money or the financial services. I speak about all services that are provided in all type of verticals. That is a very big factor of the fintech growth. So that is one thing that we see. And obviously with the COVID crisis, we have seen an acceleration in the digitization. And this acceleration means that the people being teleworking and so forth, or being obliged, let's say, to order more in e-commerce, the people get acquainted and not used to use technology and digital services. And therefore, this created a massive boost in the acceptance and the behavior of the consumers. So this crisis has just been accelerating what was underlying, what we could contemplate already for years in the past. One big trend that we can say is a fantastic specialization. So with that, I mean there are 2 types of specialization. First of all, you see that the big tech companies in a certain vertical, the big tech are, being the companies that are truly using the data as a fuel, depending on the services they provide. Actually, they are augmenting the span of their services by incorporating financial services. For example, and we see things happening in the States like Zillow. You are in the real estate, and then you jump into the loan. You are providing like Square. You are providing some PSP payment solution or terminal solution, and you jump into the loan for the small B2B business that are using your solutions. For example, you see with cheese, for the Asian American, you are focusing on some type of, let's say, persona. Lily for the freelancers. So you see, the people are providing a basic solutions. They have a wealth of data, and they are adding to that financial services. On the other hand, you could see also some fintechs that are adding some extra services. If you provide some loans, you could jump into the real estate. So that is one big specialization that is happening. A second one is really focusing on some persona. For the neobanks, we know that we are past this let's say, this big trend, but you see now that you have new neobanks addressing only the young people or the non-educated, or going further in the let's say the needs of the people that are working remotely and that want to do some remittance of their money to give this money back to their families. So these two specializations are really happening, and in essence, the best comparison that I could have is, you remember Apple when they launched the App Store, they say there is an app for everything what you need. Actually, for everything you are providing as a services, you can add to that some fintech services, and that is massive. Underlying behind this, obviously, is the data, because the more data you have, the more relevant you can be to your clients and consumers.
I think that's a great way to describe this dynamic. I mean, I see that often with the companies that are approaching me. They create a wave of innovation, and you think, surely they've solved these problems, but in fact, they unlock a new wave of innovation that kind of continues to cascade and create successive waves that create more opportunities. So it seems like, in general, fintech is just this unstoppable force that is really transforming so much of business and society at the moment.
Absolutely. And when you say so, after the crisis, all the continents around the world, America and Europe, we are all building some relaunch plans. And if you see, as an example, Belgium is dedicated for the relaunch plan, more than 30% just for digitization. And that is very important. And why is that? Because actually, this is today that you need to put the basis, the infrastructure, so that entrepreneurs can come in Belgium, in Brussels especially, and you will see what Stefaan will say from Innovaris about, what are the trams of coming into Belgium and Brussels. But they are paving the way, to developing new services, and especially for the government to develop also their own e-government offers. And that is very important, because it is creating new demands for entrepreneurs that are not only, of course, in Belgium, but also abroad. And this new demand is very important. You see in the private sector, the people are used to have, age 24, 7 days a week, some access to services. When you go and you ask a new passport, you could ask yourself, why can't I ask a passport during the weekend or during, outside the hours? And that is exactly these type of use cases that the government wants to propose. And we have a state secretary, Mathieu Michel, in Belgium, that is Mr. Digital. And this Mr. Digital is making sure that the government and the agencies of the government are providing these type of opportunities to create this demand. Now, next to that, so you have the Minister of Finance. And why is the Minister of Finance very important? Because he's driving the regulation. In Europe, we have, the EC, and we discussed about PSD2 and open data. So Europe is pretty much innovative to that respect. And what we are saying as an organization, because we are promoting our sector, we say, hey guys, not only you have the fintech, not only you have the underlying technologies like AI and blockchain, but you need really to make sure that the regulation is more certain for these new actors. And let us take the blockchain example. For the blockchain example, the regulation is still not very much defined. And you can know that, especially for digital, the crypto asset and so forth. And you can know that if the people think that there is some kind of risk, people are not going to buy if they are not sure about the technology and the services that they will purchase.
So let me just pause you there for a moment to continue this conversation a bit. Let's watch this interview featuring Marc Toledo.
You have to look at the applications of blockchain. For the time being, there is one very interesting business case, which is the business case that we can see in Jordania. It's a Syrian refugee camp that runs on blockchain. So that means that people fleeing from war zones have got nothing with them. So when they arrive in that camp, they need to have an identity and to get some money, some help to get some food, some education. In this particular camp, there are more than 100,000 people. When they arrive, they've got their iris scanned, and their iris is becoming their identity. So it's a biometric identity which is used on the blockchain to associate a wallet. And in this wallet, the United Nations, the World Food Program, is sending some money every week so that the people can go in any shops and just by presenting their eyes towards the camera can pay their bill. So that means that the money that they receive, very well how the money is used, that the money is really used for what it is meant for, and that the people won't be stolen. So that's very important in terms of security. So when you see that application, you see that it's a huge step for the humanity, because you don't need any technology anymore to prove who you are and to pay. So that means when you have a look also at other countries as Vietnam or Nigeria, you see that many people do not have access to the banking system. It's the same thing also in China. Many people do not have access to the banking system. And by just creating a wallet in the blockchain, people can get some money, can spend some money, can use it over the internet. So it brings a lot of, I would say, improvement in their life, because they can start being on the internet, they can start spending, they can also earn money. So that's, for me, one of the applications of the blockchain and the application for good.
Thank you, Marc. So that's a great example, just following what you were talking about a moment ago. Are there other examples when you look at blockchain and crypto that you're seeing them having a big impact on people's lives? And do you see other areas of fintech where these technologies are poised to have a big impact?
So definitely, I mean, it goes without saying that when you speak about blockchain, everybody's speaking about the crypto assets and the Bitcoin and Ethereum. So we all know that for various reasons, these technologies that are all part of the Web 3.0, where you have a more distributed way of doing the transaction, where the people at the end of the day with distribution, can avoid to go to third party that are centralizing things. And I think that we are going to talk about the DAO concept a little bit later in this discussion. But this technology is mature, is starting, and is going to go through the same revolution that we were actually in the 19th, where we contemplated internet. That is exactly what will happen. It will not only change the way we transact, the way we pay, but also the way we exchange things among each other, and the way we are going also to relate to the state. For example, for social benefits management, you can have a smart contract. When you have a smart contract being yourself, and everything that you did in your life, work and all the tax return you paid, and ultimately getting the reward with your pension scheme, for example, all these exchange between an individual and the state could be managed by smart contract and the blockchain. Also, the exchange in the real estate. Your house could be, thought as a contract, which is a specific digital asset. And as you go from all the works that you go for your house, the transformation you do, everything is in this certificate, in this smart contract. And when it comes that you want to sell it, well, you can just sell it, like nearly real time without having to go, through notaries or to intermediaries or even the states to ask things that are already incorporated in this smart contract. So you see, you have just the imagination is restricting you from dreaming about all what blockchain can give to the mankind. One thing that is also important that as a trend that that we do not mention too much is the inclusion, because that's very important. It is not because ESG and SDG is becoming extremely important, in the wealth management, in the private equities, in the VCs, everybody's scanning, whether and which is very good, whether companies complying with these concepts. But already in the past, the fintech, the startups have been those actors that made the financial services accessible to people that are more fragile or with less revenue. For example, in the US, the fintechs account for more than 30% of the loans that are provided to the more fragile people. So inclusion is something that is truly important underlying in the fintech. And still today, after the crisis of 2008, some people in the government still think that, okay, when you see it says fintech, these are the ugly guys, the ugly vampires that are, benefiting from your money and that are doing things in your bag, which is actually totally otherwise. And so really when I meet the members of the fintech in Belgium, but that's exactly the same in other countries, ESG and SDG sustainability are very high in their agenda. And not only these are just talks, but these are also business opportunities, so that you can really provide to those people that demand these services that can be, quote, sustainable, ecology, social, and with the greatest governance.
Thank you so much, Jean-Louis, and we'll keep the Web3 discussion in mind. We're going to come back to that towards the end of our conversation. Right now, I'm going to bring in Lionel, who is joining us from Los Angeles. Lionel, can you introduce yourself as well as Experian, which may be less familiar to Europeans than it is to myself as an American?
Well, thanks, Chris, for having me. And indeed, I'm based out of Los Angeles. I grew up in France and came to school in the US to start my career. So I spent about 10 years in asset management, hedge funds, and investment advisory firms. And then I started a project that ended up being one of the simplest robo-advisors ever launched in the US. And Experian actually backed that company, and it led me to join their fintech team. So just a quick note on Experian. We are a global fintech company for good. Really, the main practice is around data, analytics, and technology. So in the US, we're very well known as a consumer bureau. So it's a credit bureau where we store and manage your credit information. And it's the same in the UK. And depending on the countries, there is a different practice for the business that's based upon the various regulations. So in France, for example, there's no such concept as a credit bureau. Each bank has the data on their own customers, and it's not, shared in any way, to my understanding. Certainly, it is changing, but that's kind of quick note on that. So Experian, again, global, several billion-dollar company. We are traded on the London Stock Exchange, and my specific team focuses on servicing the fintech ecosystem here in the US with a very strong theme around financial inclusion. And the way we do that is we power these companies with certain data sets that maybe are a little bit harder to consume for banks, and therefore you need to have a very specific expertise in order to open up basically your lending universe to folks that may not fit the traditional box. So that's kind of what I do and what I'm happy to do here at Experian.
That's a great overview, and it's interesting for me, even as someone familiar with the company, to know it's so much more broader than the part that I interact with in terms of my credit score, as you mentioned, and that it's both a name that's been around for a while, but also continuing to innovate and expand in a lot of interesting ways. Along that line, you have talked about two big areas where you see change in financial services, deep tech and the consumer side. So can you define each of those a little bit for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and I'll sort of use analogies so it's a bit easier to comprehend. I think some of the folks on the panel touched upon a lot of these items before. So the deep tech, I would say, it's what we don't see. So think about how money moves between between countries, and things like that. So there's an incredible amount of venture capital and overall investment capital that went into building or rebuilding the overall financial ecosystem on a global basis. And again, that's what we don't see. So I think an example of that is how you would wire some money from being in Europe to the US. You don't exactly know how that works, and it's very expensive. So think about how much easier it could be with better technology. So that's just an illustration. Now, I think the one that's of more interest and that deserves a lot more attention because it's closer to all of us. It's really what you mentioned as the consumer side. So all those applications that we have available to us, going from the basic banking services to access to capital. So think about, lending, access to credit cards, wealth management, insurtech, all of these things that are now available very easily through mobile apps. And that's the consumer side. So I don't really want to go into the specifics of companies, but of course, in the US, we've seen, Fintech being an incredible industry for public markets. A lot of exits this year from, companies that were backed, let's say 5 to 10 years ago by venture capital, now going onto the public markets, which means that a different set of investors are now basically backing these companies.
So that's a great overview, particularly on the consumer side. We'll stay away from specific companies, but I'm wondering if you can just go a step further and talk a little bit about what's driving the change there. Is it a question of convenience, access? Is it a generational shift with fintech for TikTok, or is it some combination of all these things?
Yeah, I think there's so many sort of trends. One that Jean-Louis mentioned just before me is this concept of the digital transformation. So more specific to our daily lives, we want convenience. And we're talking about different generations, but really everybody wants convenience. It's human nature to want everything right away and to have it very conveniently available. So where we are going really is where I think China is right now, where you would have one app that enables you to talk to your friends, send them money, access banking services, pay when you go to a store, all of these things into sort of one ecosystem. So in the US, we've seen a tremendous push from many, many different companies focusing on various aspects of it. So if you want to, let's say, trade, you may go to Robinhood, and I'll use those as kind of illustration of many, many others. If you want to go to a bank, you may go to a Chime, a Vero, MoneyLion, and or SoFi. And if you want wealth services, you may go to a Betterment or a Wealthfront, things like that. So now we are able to access all these services very conveniently on the phone. Maybe it's on a Sunday where nothing else would be available, and it's convenient for us to transact at that point, and we're able to do so. So that demand that immediate need to access services, really, to me, is what is supporting this trend of building these companies and, of course, attracting a ton of capital because, we have a lot of users wanting to use specific services, and therefore people will build the tools and the services to basically meet that demand. And fast forward a few years, you do have, again, these companies going public or merging with one another and allowing for that next, wave of innovation.
So along those lines, how do you see fintech having the biggest impact on people's lives?
Again, access to financial services, which now in this digital world is paramount. So if you don't have a bank account, it's very difficult to live a normal life. You can't obviously have access to any of the digital goods that we consume. Think Amazon or eBay or whatever else you do. So the ability to have a simple bank account is the basic definition of financial inclusion. And then from there, you're able to have access to loans, you're able to have access to credit cards that can facilitate your path towards basically a better daily life. So back to my initial point, access is really the key.
Great. Thank you so much, Lionel, for joining us. Now let's pivot just slightly to a field that's often linked to fintech, but is also quite distinct, insurtech. To enlighten us on this rapidly changing sector, we have Jean-Charles Velge of Cover. Welcome, Jean-Charles.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Cover has been ranked in the top 15 insurtech in the world. Tell us a bit more about the company and its focus.
Yes, sure. So Cover is a Belgian insurtech based in Brussels. We are now 150 employees, started in 2016. We cover 1 million persons across 32 European countries. And what we do is we rewire the insurance industry. So it's really about rebuilding the insurance infrastructure digitally and cross-border. And so the initial idea of the company was to build a Stripe of insurance, Stripe, one of the best-known fintechs, and to do that for the insurance industry. And so how we pitch it is that the economy today, tech is not a vertical anymore. It's really a horizontal that goes through all the verticals of the economy. And all the winners on that basically tech horizontal, well, they all need insurance solutions, either to embed insurance into their product, to enhance it, to get it a better customer experience, or to cross-sell and upsell. And for all the players of the new economy, well, that insurance needs to be first digital, and second, that insurance needs to be cross-border. And so what we've built to that problem is a digital native insurance company without a balance sheet that is agnostic on the product and on the country by design. And so today we work with a lot of well-known tech companies of the likes of Revolut in the fintech, or Monies, or Deliveroo, Glovo, and so forth and so on, to really be able to embed insurance like you would embed a financial service into your product, but at scale across many geographies. We do that in Europe and coming to the US in 2022 also.
Thank you for that overview. It strikes me insurance is something that we all experience in our lives, but we tend to underappreciate the role it plays in the economy. So that's a great context to have, how it's really having a bigger impact day to day on the economy than I think most people tend to realize. So in that respect, what are the current problems with the traditional insurance industry?
Well, there's several problems. It's very much a legacy industry, even more than the banking world. There's two major problems. One is, of course, the digitalization. That's not there, or very sketchily so. But even more so, and more importantly, is the fact that those companies, insurance companies, are fundamentally local. But what does that mean? It means that if you are one of the winners in tech, in whatever vertical, if you want to do digital insurance, you have to rebuild it block by block by block by block, country by country. And so That's exactly what we try to do at Cover, is to be the one-stop shop for cross-border digital insurance, and so to rewire the insurance company industry. And so in that matter, we are you have to see Cover as much as a tech company as a legal and insurance company, because we do quite a bit of R&D, deep R&D in legal and in insurance laws to be able to do that in a cross-border way.
Yeah, I believe me, I can relate to everything you're saying about dealing with traditional international divisions of big companies like that. So in that respect, I think this fits into what the theme you're just talking about. But you once said that what happened in fintech will happen in insurtech. So what did you mean by that? And how do you see consumers being impacted by these changes?
I actually quoted it a little bit differently, is what happened in fintech will happen with a vengeance in insurtech. What I mean by that is fintech started 15 years ago, and you see now how fintech has grown and is really fundamentally changing the way we interact basically with the world. That's the reality, because we managed to have all those payments embedded, and it has set out a huge revolution for other lines of innovation. Well, the thing here is that with insurtech, it might go way faster than in fintech. And the reason for that is in fintech, you're very much linked to your bank. It's very hard to untangle all the services that you previously had with your bank and put it in a digital way. And so that's why it's very much the neobanks with the new consumers that are targeted first. In insurtech, the difference is that your contract is only a one-year contract. And you don't care if your contract is with Allianz, AXA, or whatever. And so it means that every year, the insurance company can actually lose their contract and it can go to insurtech companies. So the potential for this to go very, very quickly is huge. And so that's why it will happen with a vengeance in insurtech.
Now, let me just bring back Lionel into this conversation. Lionel, I understand that Experian has also moved into insurtech. We previously were talking about it primarily from the financial aspect of what you all do there. Does it make sense for consumers to have their financial and insurtech products in the same place?
So views I will express are my own. I think it does make a lot of sense because insurance is part of your financial life, right? So it's managing risk. So in that sense, I do feel that wherever you bank traditionally, was providing you insurance services to the extent that you wanted to access those there. So now bringing that into one ecosystem, I believe makes a ton of sense. With respect to Experian's play in the insurtech space in the US, the business has acquired a company that provides a number of quotes that you could see, much like you would be able to see a number of offers by lenders on business-to-consumer application. We purchased a business that allows us to do that and to provide that service to our direct customers. So this is the business-to-consumer practice of Experian.
Thank you, Lionel. I want to move our financial discussion now to the topic of open banking. Let's watch this short video.
Well, the idea behind open banking is really to see how we can open up a bit more the financial ecosystem to other players. That's what the European Commission actually wanted, to open the field for more competition and also to open it up to innovation through fintechs and other types of players. What it means in practice, it means that since the different financial information that's on your bank account, like the transactions you did and when you did them, is data that belongs to you, then it makes sense that this data becomes available to third parties with your consent, obviously. And so this whole idea of being able as a bank customer to share your data, share your banking data to another third party. It could be a fintech, but it could be another bank with your explicit consent, obviously. And so that's how in practice this is being implemented, which means that today, thanks to some regulation like PSD2 or in the UK, Open Banking UK. You can now indeed link your bank account to several different fintechs and also initiate payments from those different apps, and they will be triggered directly at your bank. The opportunities that it brings is, well, we touched upon it a bit in the beginning of the discussion. It's about getting better financial decisions that don't rely only on your financial data, but also on other parameters that you may see fit. It could be your personal beliefs or values. It could be also something else that you care about, that you want to be included in that calculation of the decision, I would say. So it's really just it gives you more flexibility than what your bank currently provides in some sense. The threats, well, I think like any new technology that opens up something that used to be relatively closed, it increases obviously the attack surface for hackers. So there is indeed some risk that this could be misused by the bad guys, I would say. But that is something that's why we have a regulation in place and specific rules in place to avoid this from happening. So this will hopefully be mitigated because of those specific items in the regulation. I still think that the advantages are far more important than the actual risks, to be honest.
So this would seem to be an interesting example of how government has played a critical role in enabling innovation. Jean-Louis, I want to bring you back in. Do you have any additional thoughts on open banking? You brought this up earlier, and how it's impacting the fintech revolution.
Well, it is tremendous, and it is not only tremendous for the fintech or the insurtech players, it is tremendous for the users. Actually, the open data and the open banking gives the power back to the owner of this data to provide this data for a better or for a good for themselves and for new services. So before, obviously, when you were, within a bank, it was very difficult to share this information with some others. And exactly when JC was speaking about the insurance contract, you could have, so many contracts in insurance that are doubling, tripling the coverage, and actually you are doubling and tripling the payments. With this giving back the rights on your own data and sharing this data, or obliging your supplier to share your own data, which is your property, actually this opens up very much innovative services for the good of, as I said, the consumers and the B2B. So, and we see, for example, with the PSD2, the Payment Service Directive 2, so many new players that were allowed to provide some easier experience for payment, for example, without having to, without the need of let's say a MasterCard or a Visa card, a credit card if you want, or a debit card. You can really further integrate the payment into an integrated experience, and the UI is fantastic for the users. PSD2, for example, yes.
Oh, thank you for that. I just want to jump back to Lionel. Lionel, I'm wondering if you can contrast the open banking impact in Europe to the state of things in the U.S.
Yeah, of course. So there is no such a thing as open banking here in the U.S. Now, the benefits that open banking in Europe has provided to really the users, I think, do remain, but they belong more so to the private sector. Not saying that there are no initiatives. Certainly, it's a big topic, owning your data and having the ability to control how it is used. It's in the news every day, but there is no comparable framework in place that we're aware of as of today in the US.
Great, thank you for that. Now, let's touch on one last aspect of fintech and insurtech, data and AI.
I think that the biggest challenge right now is for consumers and companies to regroup all of that information that they need to make those better decisions in one place. It doesn't have to be a single application, obviously, but they need access to it so that they can make better decisions. And today, their biggest challenge is to understand that. So getting insights from their own data, I would say. That's the first challenge that we see. And some fintechs and even some banks are already trying to get there, but it's still not at all mainstream today. So the biggest challenge today is getting the appropriate data, and also in the right quality, because sometimes when you look at what you get from open banking APIs, it's not necessarily something you can easily work with. So there's still a question of, okay, do we have the right data? Do we have the right quality of the data so that we can actually do something with it?
Okay, now I'm going to ask each of you to share your thoughts on that. Let me start with you, Jean-Charles. In a sentence or two, how do you see that data and AI having an impact in InsurTech?
Oh, data and AI is going to be a massive impact in InsurTech. The question that's still open now is how it can be used. It's very well used today in everything that is fraud detection. On that side of the business, there are some very good use cases. Where the use case is still open is on the pricing side. You could go very, very far with AI and do very pinpointed pricing. The problem, if you do that too much, is that you actually take away the reason of insurance. Insurance is a bit like a social security where all people put actually money in one bucket. If something doesn't work, well, everybody has paid for the one that was unlucky. So if you go too detailed on pricing, you actually take out the nature of insurance. So that's a use case that's still open, but there's lots to be done with data and many innovations to follow here.
Great. And Lionel, over to you. Your thoughts on data and AI.
Yeah, of course. So the future, really, quality of the data is paramount. You put in good data into a system, AI or not, you get a better output than if you have bad data. So again, the quality of the data is key. And I think a lot of companies, including us, are priding ourselves in providing that service. And in terms of AI, it is the evolution of modeling and being able to make better decisions based on that data. And for that reason, we know now, techniques are more and more advanced. So more data, better data, of course, the AI gets better. So then you end up having the ability to make better decisions. So again, back to the point of financial inclusion, you can know more and have better quality decision-making on a population that you would not necessarily want to lend to, and maybe you would. So that's access to capital that benefits really the overall ecosystem.
Great. And Jean-Louis will give you the last word in this portion of our discussion. Your thoughts on data and AI for FinTech.
Just one word, prediction. AI and data is all about prediction. You can predict, the behavior of some consumer. You can predict whether the people would need something. So with a greater level of prediction for the service provider, you have a better match and a better world.
Great. Thank you. That's a great optimistic note to end this portion of our conversation. Thank each of you for joining us, and please stick around if you can for the end of our conversation. Meanwhile, let's move to our third area of discussion, data and AI. So Stan, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about the history of Collibra and what the company actually does now?
Hey, this is Stijn. Thanks for having me over, and thanks for indulging my logistical challenge. So Collibra we started the company in 2008 out of Brussels. And we've been focused on enabling organizations to get better control of their data assets, which is a new asset that they're learning to deal with, just like they did before with, IT assets or talent or others. And because we provide them with that capability, they can better service their customers, their partners, and others. And our job, our mission as a company is to make sure that they do that in a governed way, that they do that with trusted data and with accessible data. So all the employees and the folks in the organization can get the maximum value out of that asset.
Now, data is something we've been hearing here a lot about during our conversations today. I'd like to know a bit more about the data landscape. We've been hearing the term big data for more than a decade. Are companies and governments really leveraging the potential? And if not, what's holding them back?
We've been talking about big data for a while. It sort of came up around the 2010s, I would say. But honestly, organizations have been investing in data for decades. It goes all the way back to the mainframe, you could argue. So they've been investing in it for decades, and they've been replacing one technology by another. One, for example, data warehouse by a data warehouse in the cloud, or they've been replacing their ETL, moving data around, by data pipelines today. But in the end, they're replacing one technology with another, but not necessarily tackling the main challenge in our view, which is first make sure you treat data as an asset, which means you know which assets you have, where they're coming from, where they're going to, who's responsible for them, how they can be used, and how they cannot be used. So as long as you don't tackle those challenges, those problems will always remain. And as long as those problems remain, you'll never be able to get the maximum value out of your data, no matter where you store it or how you move it around.
Yeah, those are all great points. You know, the thing about data also is it can conjure a lot of emotional reactions and feelings from consumers, particularly given the age we're living in right now. Looking at this from the consumer perspective, should we be worried about the idea that so much of our data is being collected, or should we be excited about the potential opportunities this could bring?
I think we should be both. As consumers, we should definitely be happy that the regulators have woken up, not just in Europe with the GDPR. There's now 150 regulations around privacy, at least worldwide, and that number is growing. So they're not doing that for no reason, right? So we should be excited about it as individuals because we can get better services and better products through the use of data and AI. But on the other hand, we should also be a little bit concerned about it, because so much wrong can also be done with data if organizations don't take care of those controls around it. For example, just a tiny amount of your data, which phone number your phone number calls, or which website you're visiting on a daily basis, and your geolocation. Collect that tiny amount of data over a number of weeks or months, and you can have a very unique digital fingerprint based on your behavioral pattern that really uniquely identifies you. And from that fingerprint, you can actually infer a lot of information, like maybe where you live or where you work or when you're commuting, but also all the way up. And those features can even say something about your psychological profile. So if that information gets abused in the wrong way, and you don't know about it as a consumer, that's just not acceptable, right? So organizations have to put those controls in place from a policy perspective, from a legal perspective, and honestly from an ethical perspective. So we should be excited about it. We should also be concerned about it. The good thing is that most organizations are still struggling with that data asset. So there's a time window in which we can be both concerned and excited while they mature their controls. And in the meantime, as I mentioned, it's good that the regulators are at least trying to protect us, because wrongdoing with data has already proven to have very negative consequences. So at least we have to try and make sure that that doesn't continue.
Well, thank you for that. I think it's a very diplomatic response to both pieces of that equation. I want to talk now a little bit about data ecosystems. I've been hearing a lot of chatter this year about this theme. There's a lot of momentum around the idea of data sharing between organizations and companies to enrich their data and analytics and to catalyze new services and insights. So can you explain a little bit more about what is going on in terms of the motivations as well as some of the challenges around data ecosystems?
There's a number of things that are challenging there. So first, if you do want to get certain things done, certain data products built, you inevitably need a customer understanding between your organization and the people and communities you're serving. Because it is in that understanding and that analysis and the insights of the data that you can actually get the value for both parties and make them work better. Now, that of course requires that you feel comfortable, and again, within a legal and so on framework, that data between those parties can safely be shared. And that includes taking care of the protection of privacy and so on and so forth. But also if you share data with me, that I'm not then forwarding that data on to other parties who maybe do things with it that you don't know about. So the ecosystem is important, and that requires agreements between all of those parties. Again, where certain regulation, like the GDPR with the processor and the controller of the data is trying to put those protections in place. But like the example that we heard earlier, you need to share that data, whether it's between, for example, your hospital or your insurer or your bank and somebody else. For certain use cases, you cannot get them done without that ecosystem. And sometimes you're going to put parties in between who actually are maybe the aggregator or the collector of that data, because it just doesn't make sense for all of that data of all of those parties to sit with one of those parties. So the ecosystem is a key aspect of many, many data products.
Great. Now I want to bring Omid into this. Welcome, Omid. Thanks for your patience, and thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely.
So can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your startup, Velge?
So Velge is a deep tech AI startup in New York City. Our mission is to help individuals and organizations to make better decisions using their data, even if they have zero knowledge of or technical background with no need to know any programming. So we are kind of innovating a lot on human-computer interfaces and building new technologies that can help people to make this kind of natural language kind of decisions, especially through natural language. So it's really hard for people, as I said, to use data, and we wanted to make sure that this becomes much easier as we continue to bring data to all organizations and all people's life.
So given the dynamic you're describing, what are some of the key elements of AI? Is it just about the algorithms, or is it something else?
It's a lot of key elements kind of contribute to this AI and how it's kind of progressing in recent years. One of them is data, as we just talked a lot about it, and the more the better, the higher quality, the better. And the other one is that every day you will find a new algorithm that makes better use of this data. The research is just unbelievably hot right now. Just every day, literally, we see papers after papers. And we have like all research scientists here, and we can't even keep up with this. And so it is really hard. And there are two other aspects that often people don't talk about that much. One of them is how important it is to have human resources to tackle this kind of problems. So, and also how much money it involves to kind of build these models. You guys probably have heard of GPT-3, and GPT-3 costs $12 million to train. And $12 million is, I'm pretty sure, is even a lot for many of the companies, big companies even, to kind of invest in training one model, right? And some of those people, those research scientists, their salaries are over like $2 million. So it's like kind of these resources are very scarce and very hard to kind of come together. So all these factors kind of create this like the idea of how AI can kind of the key elements in AI that showcase the better AI versus the worse AI, basically.
Well, thank you for that. It makes me feel better as a journalist when I'm struggling to keep up with all this as well. I'm not alone in that, even compared to experts like yourself and your company. Shifting that a little bit to look at then the theme of tech for good, where do you see AI having the biggest potential impact on that theme?
So I agree that like tech, and I would say AI is not any more a vertical. It's like a horizontal that like just touches every vertical, and that's a good analogy. So basically it's going to have impact on every single vertical. It already has. Like Amazon sells you 56% of their sales comes from personalization through all these predictive models. It's the largest company in the world. And there are a lot of verticals out there, and I really believe that AI can have a lot of kind of impact on them. AI is like software 2.0. It's just like a better software. It's much smarter. It needs less amount of work to use it, and it becomes just smarter and smarter and help you more. So you can imagine everywhere. There are two places that I personally am very interested in, and I think it will have a huge impact. One of them is healthcare, which right now, for example, in the United States, we have around 10% of the total death every year is through medical errors. And 10% is just like, it's a lot of like, you know, people are losing their lives because of medical errors. And I can see, and there are a lot of companies that are helping, and they're trying to reduce this by just making better supervision and bringing AI to look at all the things that are happening in real time and making sure that that never happens. And that can be huge in future. The other one that I'm personally also very interested in is shopping. Shopping right now is just being used by a couple of shopping companies, like a couple of e-commerce and companies, the big ones. And I really believe that consumers can get tools in future that can help them to do better shopping and get access to much better pricing and information, especially as we go to a era that people are more health conscious, they are more environmentally conscious. So AI can be like their partner to help them to kind of make those kind of decisions as they go forward.
You know, you just used the word big, and that leads me to something that worries me from time to time, because often when we're hearing about data, we're hearing about AI, it's in the context of big tech companies that have access to large amounts of resource, large amounts of data sets to do the kind of things that you're describing, which seems like a big advantage no matter what sector we're talking about. Anyone has the money and resources can really harness these tools. So is there a kind of AI gap? Is it being evenly distributed, or is it really just limited to those biggest names?
Mm-hmm. Technology is never evenly distributed at all. The access to technology is always for the biggest and largest companies, and you cannot change this. Amazon always will have more data than anyone else. They know more about supply chain more than anyone else. They know more about the consumers and trends better than anyone else. It's just like, you cannot fight that, right? The thing that we started, the reason that we started learning was the same thing, that like, okay, this is like kind of hard for like a small guy, as a small businesses. Not even, sometimes we think of a small business like 10 people, but like even company with 5,000 people, right? They are small compared to Amazon with 10,000 people just working for Alexa. So in this kind of cases, we believe that technology can kind of bring new ideas and new AI system that can help those people basically. And it's going to be very hard and it's an uphill battle, but we really think it's a challenge that we can kind of solve in future.
Great. Thank you so much, Omid. And now I want to bring in Donald Johnston. Donald, can you join us?
I'm here.
Great.
I'm happy to be here.
Welcome, and thank you for your patience. It's good to see you. Can you just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit about the work of your firm?
Yeah, well, I'm just a commercial lawyer specializing in technology. Done a lot of work in the blockchain healthcare space, and always revolving around technology. Our firm is a medium-sized firm of a couple of hundred lawyers situated in Toronto. And by the way, I have learned so much from these speakers up till now. It's amazing.
That's great to hear. Well, I know you have a breadth of experience across a lot of these sectors we've talked about and many others that we haven't talked about. I want to just kind of focus in on one in particular today, and that's your work regarding access to data. You've been part of an interesting project involving medical records in Ontario. So can you tell us a little bit about that and some of the lessons we can take away about data access?
Yeah, this was a very exciting project. There were a couple of reports in Canada, which was well on its way to being bankrupt because of the payments for healthcare. So 25 years ago, people were predicting that 60% of Canada's tax revenue would go to healthcare, and that's just nuts. So there were a number of reports that said, look, the healthcare system has to be changed. And really the only way to change it is by the use of appropriate technology. The Romano report in particular said, look, we have to have electronic medical records. They have to be rolled out everywhere. And the data that is generated in respect of each patient has to be available to provide a kind of holistic treatment for patients, because right now a patient goes to one doctor, and no other doctor has any idea what the first doctor has done, and so when the patient goes in to another doctor, they have to start from ground zero again. So electronic medical records began to be rolled out in the early 2000s, and I worked for the Ontario Ministry of Health at that time to help bring in that system. And a lot of mistakes were made, as you'd expect. I mean, you can't have a technology rollout without mistakes in it. But they did a lot of things right also. They thought for must have been 5-6 years about how the system should look. They looked at it from the patient-centric point of view. How will the patient experience be? And even questions about data governance were really at the forefront of the discussions. They knew that the system had to be scalable. It had to be democratized in a real way. There had to be engagement from all the stakeholders, the physicians, the hospitals, the patients themselves. The data quality had to be close to perfect because people could die. That's the iatrogenic disease that the previous speaker was talking about. And of course, it had to be flexible so that there could be change and management of change through that, proper training and so forth. It was huge. The result was essentially a new system of governance for health information in Canada. And really I guess I have to say that it was a change of attitude, a change of culture. People prior to about the year 2000 were really not particularly aware of their own personal data, much less medical data that may or may not be personal, but is nevertheless exceptionally valuable. And now we have essentially a governance system for data in Canada that has resulted in attitudes about data being changed.
Yeah, so a daunting project, but it sounds like there's been a fairly big payoff in the end here. I want to shift just a little bit. I know you've also worked with blockchain projects. We've had a lot of talk today already about blockchain in terms of it offering some of the benefits you just discussed, access to data, transparency, and new ways of thinking about those things. We even heard at the beginning of the event, again, about blockchain being used to enable identity, financial services. What are some of the other areas you see blockchain having an impact?
Well, the biggest impact of blockchain is going to be on the biggest technology companies, because right now the vast majority of data are owned and controlled by those few very large tech companies. Web 3.0, that is the distributed internet, if you will, really counters that concept of data being concentrated in the hands of a few, and democratizes data. When you democratize anything, you're talking about making it accessible, democratizing a park, democratizing the bus, anything like that means that it has to be accessible to ordinary people for ordinary uses, and I think that's the big bonus or special delivery of blockchain, that it will allow access to data by even very small companies. And in this presentation so far, we've heard about how small fintechs can potentially use distributed ledger systems, blockchains, to be able to provide all the ecosystem around open banking and other kinds of financial benefits for people.
That's great. And one last area to touch on here with you. We've heard bits and pieces of this throughout our conversation, but I just want to ask you a little bit about the fundamental differences you see between North American and European policy when it comes to data, data culture, and government regulation.
Well, of course, the gold standard for data protection is Europe. That back in 1995, Europe passed its first data protection directive. That was 95/47, if I recall correctly. But it was an astonishing mover and shaker of data protection throughout the world. Canada was essentially forced, by virtue of wanting to do business with Europe, essentially forced to enact its own substantially similar legislation to the Data Protection Directive from 1995, and since then has sort of tried to keep up with with all the advances that have been made in Europe, with the GDPR and ideas like privacy by design, the consent model for sharing data, and the idea that data protection is essentially a human right. Those things are now found in Canadian legislation and are gradually being enforced more and more. Now, the United States, it has a different type of regime from Canada, and so what I see, because I do lots and lots of business in the U.S., is that the United States has done a spectacular job with, for example, HIPAA, the Healthcare Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's wonderful. It's terrific. But then you look at Gramm-Leach-Bliley, which is the kind of silo that addresses financial institutions. It's a little bit different. And then as far as everything else is concerned, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States is kind of in charge of making sure that people keep their promises that are set out in their privacy policy. California has recently passed a couple of extremely important laws that really allow California to catch up with the GDPR. And whatever California does, the rest of the United States is going to do. So it's all coming together on a worldwide basis, with Europe taking the lead and essentially providing, as I say, the gold standard for the protection of data.
That's great. Stan, I'd like to pose the same question to you about the differences you see between North America and Europe in terms of data.
I agree with many of the things that were just said, and thank you for sharing. Very interesting story about Canada that I'm sure can serve as an example to many countries. I think in Europe, which is often seen as a global driver and example for regulation, you're seeing, maybe for historical reasons, you're seeing that strong focus on protection of the individual. So the data protection requirements that have been made to organizations with the GDPR are really meant to serve to a deep degree the protection of the individual. Whereas in the US, it seems more that on the one hand, the organizations themselves have more of a priority, and in combination with that, you're seeing a lot more fragmentation, because each of the states themselves can create their own specific privacy regulations. And of course, they're trying to do that also at the federal level, but that is never something that happens really quickly in the United States, especially when it comes to providing the federal government, in this case, with so much authority over the privacy regulation for the entire United States. So you're seeing a lot more fragmentation and sovereignty, if you will, in the individual member states and which legislation they can come out with.
And Amir, I'd like to call back on you, especially now that we're talking a little bit about governments again. Can you talk a bit more about the role of data and AI at Citizen Lab, as well as some of the governments you're working with?
Sure, definitely. So as mentioned, one of our main goals is to maximize our impact. And what that means is that we need to get as many people as possible to sign up on these platforms, share their data with their local governments, and essentially submit their input and opinions on different topics that are relevant to the projects that the governments are running. And that becomes the government's data, essentially, on their own citizens. Now, as mentioned, so we use NPL to clean up this data and enable governments to run through this data without having to read through it one by one and actually gather the insights. But at the same time, one of our bigger goals is to also make sure that this data can be connected with the rest of the data points that the governments have to enable them to actually make those decisions. The idea is, at the end of the day, if there's a certain topic, a certain policy that is of a concern to a certain government, they're not sure what the public opinion is around it, they can use this data to actually understand, okay, what do people actually want? How can they actually serve the needs of their communities? And do this by running through the reports and looking at the historical data, filter by demographics to understand the marginalized groups in the society and how they can get there.
Great, thank you, Amir. And now I want to bring Fred back. Fred, in addition to all the hats that we mentioned previously that you're wearing, you've also been asked to lead the AI for Good project. So I'm wondering if you can tell us more about this initiative.
Yeah, sure. So AI for Good is basically part of AI for Belgium. And historically, I mean, if you go back to the AI plan, the strategic plan that we had for the country, that was, I would say, shaped up in 2018 or 2019, we didn't really put that into full implementation. And basically AI for Belgium is meant to be a very light touch organization that coordinates a little bit the AI ecosystem. I'm leading one of this chapter around AI for Good. And the goal of AI for Good is really try to basically, I would say, structure the ecosystem, making sure that the different stakeholders match and meet to address specific social questions. And as I think that Omid said it before, I mean, many of these questions are very complex questions, and a social question is basically requires to have a lot of different stakeholders to meet and to work together towards the same direction. And you have like a lot of verticals when you talk about AI for Good. You can have a vertical around health. You can have a vertical around energy, around gender. And an example of topic that we are trying to bring up to life is the use of AI to fight violence against women and sexual harassment, for instance. I mean, you can use robots for that. I mean, you can use bots for that. And where people basically report their stories, where people basically are guided through the different support and help that they can tap into. And so basically the idea of AI for good, as I said before, is really to try to coordinate a little bit the ecosystem, to structure the ecosystem, to bring up a strategic agenda, to bring up like some flagship projects to life, and to probably also identify some funding mechanism. And so that's the entire idea of AI for good, which is more like I would say, a coordinating body rather than a really operational project.
Great. Now, to wrap up our conversation, I want to touch on one phenomenon that we've heard referenced throughout this discussion, which is Web3. It's getting a tremendous amount of hype. We have a little video now to help frame that conversation.
I'm not an expert on crypto. You mentioned Web3. I think that there's a lot of noise around Web3 at the moment, but too often it is linked to blockchain or cryptocurrencies. I think that Web3 is about much more than that. It's really about a distributed web. It's not something that necessarily is linked to the blockchain whatsoever. It's really about rethinking the way the web works in a distributed way without the centralization that we see today, centralization of data, of wealth, and all of that. So to me, there's too much linking between Web3 and blockchain, which I think is an issue because there's a lot of other initiatives like IPFS, for instance, that are actually worthwhile mentioning because they challenge a bit the way we store data on the web and we do it. So to me, it's about more than crypto or blockchain, the Web3. Now, if you want to go into really the crypto part and is that what are my thoughts on this? I think like a lot of people, I look at this with a lot of curiosity, but I don't necessarily have any conclusions of my own, to be honest. I think it's an interesting trend. I see this as a different way to look at money and as a different way to look at how value can be exchanged between people or companies. But whether or not this is going to be the next big thing or not, honestly, I'm not a fortune teller, so I can only look at this with what I know, and I find this very interesting, both technically and also from a concept perspective. But I mean, my own experience of the financial world does not give me enough tools to tell you if that's going to be great or not.
So as we heard, the technologies that are creating a more decentralized web are being embraced in a wide range of areas driven by blockchain and cryptocurrencies. So I'll put this question to a couple of our panelists. Is Web3 a component of tech for good? Donald, let's start with you.
I'm a lawyer. I'll give you a firm maybe on that. I do think that decentralized autonomous organizations are one of the ways in which we can democratize the planetary communication. I think it's really, really important. But the experience we've had with Web 2, let's say, hasn't. I would give us a C minus, maybe, or a D plus grade on that. We haven't really used it to the extent that we should, and I would predict that Web 3 also has a rocky road in front of it.
And Fred, last word to you. Web 3, can it be a force for tech for good?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, having a decentralized approach will bring up some use cases that we couldn't tackle in a more centralized way with Web 2. And there are some use cases. I mean, for instance, you have like a mapping of all the land ownership for some countries, just so that in case your neighbor invades you, basically you still keep some track record of all the land ownership of your country. The thing is with Web3, which is very decentralized somehow, first it's the link with blockchain and cryptocurrency. I don't really see, I mean, there is a link, and obviously one is going to influence the other, and it's not really clear to me in which direction it's going to go, because if cryptocurrency goes in a direction, in a certain direction, would that mean that the Web3 is going to go in the same direction, which is sometimes positive, sometimes negative? And the other element that somehow drew my attention is about regulation, because regulating a very centralized web like Web 2 is one thing, but regulating a very decentralized web is another thing. And so we probably need to think a little bit more about how we want to regulate such an environment, I would say.
Yeah, thank you for that. Very big challenges ahead, very interesting potential. So we'll see how this unfolds. I want to take a moment just to thank all of our panelists for joining us and being so generous with their time. You know, we've talked across several different categories: GovTech, Fintech, data, and AI. We've treated them a little bit separately here, but I think what we've heard during this conversation is how interrelated all these things really are in terms of generating innovation and sharing common themes like fomenting greater access, having an impact potentially on the lives of citizens, the economy and business, democratizing the flow of information, and really helping, hopefully, to bring more tech for good into our economy and society. Finally, I'd like to invite Stefaan Sonck Thiebaut to join us for some final words. Stefaan is General Director of Innovirus, Brussels, and has worked for quite some time in Silicon Valley. Stefaan, what are your highlights of this Tech for Good Insight Talk?
Yes, first of all, thanks to everybody for your contributions to this interesting discussion. I learned a lot today and have a lot of ideas to take with me to Innovirus. So for me, the highlights were that we learned a lot about this fast advancing technology, this horizontal technology that will impact all the verticals. We learned about wave after wave of innovation, paper after paper, that will enable us to control data and take intelligent, data-driven, maybe automated decisions. What I thought was very inspiring is that almost everybody talked about impact, that these technologies are not just about making our lives just easier, more convenient, providing more individualized services, but it's also about democratization, providing access, providing services to groups of people who didn't have these services before, improving the interaction between governments and citizens. So I think this really shows the importance of these technologies. That's really AI for good. I also thought that this was a testimony to the power of entrepreneurship. We had many people here from companies who were startups just a few years ago and who now are in the top of their field at a worldwide level. So I think that's very impressive and inspiring. That's also what we at Innovirus try to do to help companies in these phases. And finally, we talked about the role of government. Government as a customer, right? We need these solutions to improve the service that we provide to you, to our citizens, but also government as a regulator. Right? It's important to protect citizens, and we talked about GDPR and open data, but also as an enabler of new business models, where we also talked about open banking. It was interesting to hear about the cultural differences between the EU, Canada, and the United States. There with a different approach to the role of government versus the private sector. But in the end, it's also very much about globalization, providing worldwide services, such as, for example, worldwide insurance. So lots of ideas. I had a very good time. It was very interesting to learn about all these technologies and sectors.
Great. Well, I'm glad it was enlightening. I've certainly enjoyed it. I do want to take a moment, though, just to jump back to Innovirus. Can you tell us a little bit more about the organization's mission, as well as the ecosystem here in our host city of Brussels?
Yeah, exactly. So first, Innovirus, we're a public service. Our role is to support and encourage research and development and innovation in the Brussels capital region. And we have the possibility to subsidize research projects in companies, small enterprises, medium-sized, large enterprises. We also support research centers, and we especially support cooperation between enterprises and local universities in Brussels. And we also support cooperative projects between governments, enterprises, companies, and research centers. We are not alone here in Brussels in supporting companies. We have our colleagues from Hub who also organized this event, and they are there to help companies setting up and growing in Brussels. And we also work together with the Finance and Invest Brussels, and they are a public investor that can complement private investors. So we are here to basically support this ecosystem around research and development, innovation, entrepreneurship in Brussels.
Great.
So you asked a bit about the ecosystem. So maybe a good place to start is first to say that at the European level, Brussels is an innovation leader. So every 2 years, the European Commission compares about 300 regions in Europe, looking at their power to innovate. And Brussels there is at the top level. We are at placed 14 out of 300, so we are an innovation leader. And there are several reasons for that. I think the first reason is the concentration of universities and the availability of talent here in Brussels. So alone in the area of artificial intelligence, we have almost 1,000 researchers, and we have about 13 dedicated research centers who focus on artificial intelligence. The region just created a new center called FARI, which is Artificial Intelligence for the Common Good, that will bundle all of the research activities around artificial intelligence and will also be an interface around between research and enterprises, companies who want to take advantage of this new technology. And I think this shows the philosophy of the region, which is very much in line with what you said, is that we see digital technologies, advanced digital technologies at the heart of our innovation strategy, but we always try to see it as a tool, as something that we want to use to do something good, to really provide new services and products to our customers. The second reason why Brussels is innovation leader is our startup and entrepreneurial community here. So we have a lot of dynamism in our startups, especially in the ICT area. Brussels there is among the top there again in Europe. And the third area is the fact that we're a very international region. Of course, we're at the center of Europe, which means that from here we can provide access to this big European market with 500 million citizens and potential customers of your products and services. But here in Brussels, we are also very close to all of the European institutions. And I think culturally, Belgians and people in Brussels are very much oriented towards the outside. We're multilingual, and we're very used to working together with other regions and other countries within Europe and around the world. And it's also shown by the fact that many international companies, about 1,500, have their headquarters in Brussels. And then finally, I decided personally to move back to Brussels because I think it's a great city, and I think it's important when people decide to create a new company to invest a lot of their life energy in such a project. People want to do it in a place where they also like to live, and I think Brussels has this quality of life to offer. Affordable living costs, affordable office rents, and we're also actually the greenest capital with the most parks and the most trees in all of Europe. So I think Brussels is a great place, and I'm very happy to be able to support all of these the companies here because of the concentration available of talent, our international orientation, the dynamic entrepreneurial culture, and the quality of life. And maybe one last thing, what I found was very interesting is that of all of the companies from Brussels that were here today, actually Innovirus was able to help them in their past with one of our projects. Yeah, so for example, Colibra, which is now one of the leaders in data processing, was actually one of the winners of our Innovative Starters Awards 10 years ago. And also Citizen Lab got this award about a year or so ago. So I'm happy to see that the companies that Innovirus invested in short while ago, or sometimes 10 years ago now, are really able to grow and expand and really impact the world in a positive way.
That's great. It has to be very rewarding, and I appreciate that overview of Brussels. It really is a remarkable crossroads of technology, culture, language, government, and business. So you've convinced me.
Okay, great, happy.
I want to thank you, though, for your time, and once again, for everyone who's joined us for this great conversation, our panelists and our experts sharing their insights. And thank you for watching with us. I'm going to leave you now with this short tech tour video of our host city, Brussels.
Decentral is a tech campus, so we are a place where citizens can learn technologies, where entrepreneurs can grow a tech company, and where we talk about tech policymaking. There are about 70 different nationalities. There are people from 18 to 72, or probably a bit more. They're 45% women. So we are trying to recreate the diversity of Brussels within the premises of the Central Station building. Brussels is an amazing place to launch a tech company and to grow it. First, because it is a very diverse city. And especially for people and for companies who need to grow a service within Europe, Europe is a set of very diverse cultures. And here in Brussels, we have a sample of that diversity. And this is an unreplicable advantage that actually here it is possible to build very diverse companies and very diverse teams.
BeAngels was created 20 years ago. It currently has 8 employees, and we have 2 types of clients. We have companies, we help them raise financing near private investors who we encourage to invest in unquoted startups through 5 different types of services. So what I love in my job is meeting everyday people who are not risk averse, entrepreneurs who risk it all, and private investors who invest part of their money in those companies. Brussels is a great place to launch a startup. First, because it's a very open-minded city, very multicultural, it creates open-mindedness and entrepreneurialism. The second reason is that it's very dynamic, it's booming, its environment is booming. And the third is that you have places like BeCentral that have become leaders in Europe as digital tech ecosystems. So the average amount of financing raised for a first round by a company with BeAngels is between 200 and 250,000 euros in capital to complement other forms of financing. So the added value of working with BeAngels for the entrepreneurs is that we put them in touch with business angels that bring more than just capital to the table. They bring added value, networks of contacts, and competence. And the second thing is that we have built a whole ecosystem for them with different financing tools for different stages of development for them.
CoStation being a co-working place also in Brussels, of course, in Ghent and in Charleroi, and also a meet place or a collaboration place for open innovation projects. We have really a mix of entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs, who rent offices, so who have their offices here at CoStation. We have companies, big companies from whatever size, that also rent places to have meetings or workshops. And then what makes us really unique then at CoStation is that we operate and we facilitate open innovation projects. So we noticed also that a lot of these tech entrepreneurs are inspiring. So an IT guy from one company can help or support or inspire another IT from another company. And I think it's also the fact that you build on the experience of these different people to really make the difference and to continue to learn and to grow, even for introvert people. What I like about Brussels a lot is the diversity of the people. I think we can be very proud for Belgium, but especially for Brussels, is on the diversity of its citizens, the diversity of the entrepreneurs, the diversity of the people also involved, the diversity of different companies and different sizes, different talents, to bring them together and to make them create new things together also to really create an impact.
ECAP started in 2009, meaning that we have been in operation for about 10 years. We work with a staff of 3 people. Nevertheless, we have accomplished a lot with these 3 people. Over the 10 years, we coached 150 companies, and they together raised about 30 million in foreign capital. ECAP provides incubation services, meaning that we help companies progress through the different stages of their development, and we structure them around 3 pillars. First of all, this is providing them with a productive ecosystem, so it's a place where they can come into contact with other companies, learn from them, create synergies with them. We also offer individual coaching. And thirdly, and it's also very important, is we offer qualitative housing. Incubators can help tech companies grow basically in 3 ways. First of all, we provide quality housing at affordable prices. Secondly, this is an ecosystem where people can meet other people, other companies that are in the same position and grow together with them, create synergies. And thirdly, we provide individual coaching. For me, Brussels is one of the top places for tech entrepreneurs to start or to grow a business, and that's for several reasons. First of all, it's centrally located, and you have a quick access to other innovation hubs like Paris, Amsterdam, Berlin. Secondly, it's multilingual. You also have access to a large pool for your workforce. And thirdly, but perhaps most importantly, it's a small ecosystem, but it has a lot of resources for startups, and they are all very well connected.
In Brussels, your company will find a productive, flexible, and internationally oriented workforce coming from top universities.
And top universities with very strong engineering, computer science, and technology programs.
Top startup accelerators and incubators are also part of the story.
And amazing projects, such as the digital campus, which is called B-Central, a place to learn that was developed with partners such as Google, Le Wagon, B-Code.
The Khan Academy also. In a nutshell, Brussels is the best place to find resources your company needs to grow.